In this podcast episode, Joe Kent, the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center and a decorated military veteran, speaks candidly on his resignation and the ongoing U.S. war with Iran. Throughout the conversation, he delves into the origins and rationale behind the conflict, the role of Israeli influence on American policy, intelligence failures and manipulations, internal tensions within U.S. government agencies, the consequences of military action, and the broader geopolitical stakes involving China and regional allies. Kent also addresses fears of escalating domestic terror and censorship, the unresolved questions surrounding prominent political assassinations, and his hopes for a diplomatic resolution led by former President Trump. Kent opens by emphasizing the bloody and convoluted nature of any military engagement with Iran. While an initial shock and awe campaign might score quick victories, as witnessed in Iraq, any such success would be fleeting. Iran, with its multi-millennial empire status, is deeply entrenched and highly resilient. A war of this magnitude would entangle the U.S. militarily across multiple theaters, benefiting geopolitical rivals like China, who would capitalize on American distraction and economic exhaustion. The fallout would undermine U.S. influence globally, marking a potential realignment of power. Kent traces a historical pattern in U.S. foreign policy, whereby individuals who foresaw and warned against disastrous interventions were often sidelined or persecuted. He references journalists like Walter Cronkite during Vietnam and military officials like Colonel Stu Scheller after Afghanistan, illustrating how honest critique tends to be punished, while those orchestrating or perpetuating the failures escape accountability. This dynamic inhibits truth-telling and perpetuates cycles of misinformation and policy failure. A significant part of the discussion focuses on how Israeli government officials and pro-Israel U.S. media personalities have shaped American perceptions and policies toward Iran. Kent argues that Israeli interests have strongly pushed for a regime change war against Iran, pressuring U.S. leadership to enter conflicts not aligned with American national interests. He describes a misinformation campaign that manufactured a sense of imminent Iranian threat to justify military action, similar to tactics used before the Iraq War. This influence, he asserts, short-circuited robust debate and stifled divergent views within the U.S. government. Kent stresses that, based on his highest-level access to intelligence, there was no evidence of an imminent Iranian threat to the United States at the time of the recent conflict escalation. Contrary to public rhetoric emphasizing nuclear brinkmanship, the Iranians were neither close to obtaining a nuclear weapon nor preparing a surprise attack. He explains Iran's careful escalation calculus, particularly under Trump's administration, and highlights the religious fatwa against nuclear weapons in place since 2004. Yet narratives pushing for military action exaggerated enrichment activities to suggest a red line that, if crossed, would require immediate response, a red line advanced primarily by Israeli channels and echoing through U.S. media. Kent lays out a fundamental divergence between American and Israeli objectives in the Middle East. Where the U.S., especially under Trump's earlier terms, sought to avoid endless wars, maintain stability, and prevent proliferation, Israeli goals are described as favoring regime change in Iran, even if that results in perpetual chaos. Israel's tolerance for destabilization contrasts with U.S. concerns about regional energy security and global economic repercussions. Kent cautions that Israel's military strategies and thresholds for civilian harm differ markedly from American norms, with grave implications for any partnered operations. The conversation tackles the glaring lack of a credible plan for governing Iran should its regime be toppled. Kent candidly admits that no clear American or Israeli blueprint exists for the aftermath, and speculates that some proponents are indifferent to the potential chaos that might ensue. This absence of foresight looms as a major hazard if military action proceeds, risking a protracted insurgency, regional destabilization, mass migration, and greater global insecurity. Having spent his career battling Iranian proxies, Kent warns of inevitable blowback in the form of increased domestic terrorist threats within the United States. Intelligence assessments anticipate that lone actors inspired by extremist propaganda, particularly fueled by conflicts in Gaza and the Middle East, could lead to violent incidents on American soil. He criticizes open border policies for complicating the ability to track those who pose security risks, and calls for tightened immigration enforcement as a national security imperative. Kent provides unsettling insights into internal obstacles he faced while trying to investigate politically sensitive cases. In particular, he recounts being blocked from fully probing the assassination of Charlie Kirk, a notable Trump advisor who vocally opposed war with Iran. Despite leads indicating possible foreign involvement, intelligence agencies, including the FBI and DOJ, restricted access to critical evidence and information. Kent also points to failures in securing President Trump's security detail and calls out apparent disregard for multiple assassination attempts against the former president, suggesting a possible coercive atmosphere affecting high-level decision-making. Kent speculates on what might have compelled President Trump, a decade-long proponent of pulling back from Middle Eastern conflicts, to shift course and embrace war with Iran. He references the intensive influence from pro-Israel donors, media pressure, possible intimidation factors, and personal security concerns following assassination attempts and violent breaches. This complex environment, coupled with misinformation campaigns, may have constrained presidential autonomy. Kent leaves open the possibility that coercion or behind-the-scenes pressure played a role, a stark departure from expected democratic transparency. Kent laments the enduring culture of secrecy and deception within American institutions and the resulting erosion of public trust. He cites the ongoing withholding of classified documents around historically significant events like the Kennedy assassination as symptomatic of a broader system resistant to accountability and open governance. According to him, this bureaucratic control over information undermines democracy and empowers entrenched interests that frustrate genuine reform. Despite the grim outlook, Kent offers a glimmer of hope centered on President Trump's unique leadership capabilities. He suggests that Trump could single-handedly halt the escalation by confronting Israel's unchecked influence, demanding an end to Israeli offensive operations, and reasserting U.S. sovereignty over foreign policy decisions. Kent envisions a path toward a negotiated ceasefire with Iran, involving regional partners like the Gulf states, and lifting certain sanctions to incentivize peace. This strategy aims to reopen critical maritime routes, restore energy flows, and preserve the dollar's global standing, outcomes aligned with American strategic interests and global stability. Throughout the interview, Kent's personal dedication and ethical compass emerge clearly. He describes his military service, including 11 combat deployments and extensive combat experience against Iranian proxies, refuting accusations that he is soft on the regime or disloyal. His resignation is framed as a principled stand driven by frustration over government dysfunction and a genuine desire to prevent further loss of American life and national decline. Kent emphasizes his faith, family support, and commitment to truth-telling in the face of public attacks and smear campaigns, underscoring his view that transparency and honesty are essential to saving the country. Kent contrasts American military norms, characterized by careful mitigation of civilian casualties, sometimes at great risk, with Israeli practices that, he asserts, display a lower threshold for collateral damage. Using the Gaza conflict as a reference point, he stresses that Americans must acknowledge these differences when operating alongside or supporting Israeli forces. This discrepancy complicates alliances and risks implicating the U.S. in humanitarian crises that damage global standing and moral legitimacy. Kent highlights how a tightly controlled media and political echo chamber has shaped public opinion and policy, disseminating Israeli-aligned narratives while drowning out alternative perspectives. The absence of balanced debate allowed falsehoods about Iranian threats to solidify into accepted truths, influencing presidential decisions and diminishing dissent within the administration. He warns that such manipulation not only led to catastrophic decisions, but also fuels public polarization and misinformed support for perpetual conflict. A recurring theme is Kent's rallying cry for radical truth-telling as the only viable path to rectifying the nation's current trajectory. He stresses that lies and deception erode faith in institutions and producing a moral poison at the heart of society. Kent advocates for an honest reckoning with past mistakes including the wars in Iraq, Syria, and now Iran, and insists that leadership must prioritize straightforwardness to regain public trust and enable effective policy. The conversation places the Iran war within a wider geopolitical context, emphasizing it as a critical front in the U.S.-China global rivalry. Kent explains that entanglement in a costly Middle Eastern conflict diverts American resources and attention from the Pacific theater, exposing vulnerabilities to Chinese aggression. He underscores that China benefits economically and strategically as the U.S. becomes mired in protracted wars abroad. The confrontation with Iran, therefore, not only impacts Middle Eastern stability, but also the future balance of global power. Kent reveals troubling lapses in the security of President Trump and the political violence faced by his advisors, citing specific incidents such as breaches by off-duty officers, sniper attempts, and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. The obstruction of thorough investigations raises concerns about internal rivalries, bureaucratic inertia, and possible deliberate cover-ups. Kent points to these events as evidence that underlying threats to American democracy and leadership remain inadequately addressed. Kent argues that U.S. foreign policy must be decisively reoriented to serve American citizens first, setting aside influences that do not align with national interests. He advocates for a governance model akin to familial or military leadership, where decisions are grounded on whether they genuinely protect and benefit the people. This approach, he insists, is neither partisan nor radical, but fundamental to restoring national stability and sanity in international affairs.